All right, let's give this a shot. Looks like the mic is working. It looks like everything is working hunky-dory, so we'll jump in. This is the purpose of this is to have a live stream where we talk about how to use AI as a thinking training tool. And one of the things that we talked about last time was how to use conjectures and refutations. You create a prediction of what a thing is going to be about. You create a mental map, and based off of that mental map, you then make a projection that you can test. So before you've even read a book, summarize it. Identify what it's going to be about. Judge it by its cover. Figure out what you can from the title, from the author bio, from a really brief scan of the back page, maybe a really quick scan of the table of contents. And from this beginning, create a projection about what it's about. Summarize the book. Tell yourself, okay, this book is going to be about this, this, and this. These are going to be its biases. This is when it was written. I can expect this sort of tone. I can expect this sort of content. I can expect this sort of depth. Make a prediction, as much detail as you can. And then using that prediction, you can then make some testable hypotheses. You can say, okay, if I'm correct, I'll find this. And if I'm wrong, I'll find this. That can then help you to go into phase two, which is to try to refute your own model. You've created this model of what the book is about. You can then go to the table of contents and look for anything that surprises you, anything that does not fit your model. You go through that a little bit until you're able to step back and say, okay, I was wrong because of this. You refine your model again, and you repeat this process multiple times. This is a way of learning very, very quickly. So with that as kind of what we talked about last time, what I want to talk about this time is two different styles of questions and a way of discriminating between questions, at least discriminating in the good way, differentiating between them and identifying which one to use in what context. There is no such thing as a dumb question in some ways. In other ways, there very much are such things as dumb questions. When you have a question that is sincere, where you genuinely want to get some information from it, that is always going to be helpful and it will always move the needle at least a little bit toward finding more truth. But there are better questions. Some questions are better than others. Questions almost always have information baked into them. The idea of a leading question is one that has some portion of a conclusion baked into it. You always have assumptions built into questions. There are questions you can ask where there is no possible good answer because there is so much baked into it that answering the question with a yes or a no means that you're agreeing to a statement that may not be true. A classic example of this one is, have you stopped beating your wife? If you say yes, then that implies that at some point in the past you were beating your wife and then have stopped. And if you say no, well, then that implies that you're still beating your wife. You have assented to that idea. In either case, you're agreeing to the idea that at least at some point you have beat your wife, which is I hope that's not true. The assumption baked into that question makes it a dishonest question, a difficult question, a problematic question. In this stream, what I want to talk about briefly is two different styles of um, asking questions that come from a legal context. In court, you have direct examination and you have cross examination, and they operate very, very differently. In a trial, you'll have a witness introduced, and a witness is always introduced by one side of the argument. You've got the plaintiff side and the defense side in a civil suit. You've got the prosecutor side and the defense side in a criminal suit. And let's say that the prosecutor brings in a witness. The witness sits at the witness spot in the witness stand. The first lawyer who gets to ask questions of this witness is the one who is introducing the witness. So prosecutor introduces a witness, prosecutor gets to ask questions first. But there are limitations on what this attorney is allowed to ask. They're only allowed to ask direct examination questions, which means questions that are not leading, where there's no hint of an answer baked into the question. They have to be very open-ended. So can you introduce yourself? There's not a lot of content in that one. I mean, you're yourself, we're going to grant that. There's information baked into the question there, but it's very open. So the person introduces themselves a little bit. They've now offered some information. that attorney is only allowed to ask questions that are so open-ended that they're obvious, or that reference information which has already been presented before the presented from this witness. So they can ask follow-up questions. Okay, you said that you do this for a living. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? That question now implies what the person does for a living, but that information has already been introduced. There's a foundation laid for it. And this style of question is when an objection might be raised, objection leading the witness. That's only a problem during a direct examination. After a lot of information has been presented and the direct examination is done, now the other attorney gets a chance to ask questions of this witness. The court's interest in this whole questioning process is to extract truth. And they do that through the personalities of the two attorneys that are representing this. You've got personality one, which is in a very open, friendly, open-ended sort of questioning, just trying to get as much information out there as possible. Good, bad, and ugly. We just want to get all the information out there. And there's a little bit of an art to asking questions that are going to open up and kind of bring information useful to your case, but it's very open. Then the other side's job, in order to bring truth to the courtroom, is to ask detail questions. Questions where there are yes or no answers, questions where there's a little bit more baked into the question, questions that are perhaps a little bit hostile, questions that introduce the falsification element that from our conjectures and refutations idea from last time. So one is getting the story. Tell us your story. And the second one is saying, okay, in your story, you mentioned this detail and this detail. How do those not contradict each other? Or you stated this. Is that correct? Do you stand by that? And then drilling in on the details. And in that case, the questions are essentially all leading questions, at least in the sense that they are drive toward a particular point and may have conclusions baked into them. And there's a lot more room for yes or no questions. It looks like the stream may have died. Let's check and see what's going on there. No, it seems to be working. Yep. It's just a very, very slow stream, and that's totally fine. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. I love getting some back and forth with the discussion with you. So provided this thing picks up and starts working again, we'll do that. And it'll be good. On the assumption that it's working, let's continue just a little bit further. With the personalities of these two, it's helpful to, when you're working with a chatbot, to be careful about what kind of questions you're asking. What biases are you introducing? What ways are you leading the AI? And also, is your question sufficiently open or closed for the type of answer that you want? You get to control what sort of answers you get based off of the breadth or narrowness of your question. Some questions, some types of information you may want to get from a chatbot are best served with very open questions, some that are similar to a direct examination. Others are best served by a very closed question, similar to cross. Think of cross-referencing as well. You're trying to figure out how things line up, exactly where the information goes together. I'll give you a funny example also from a legal context. There was a famous case from last year where there was an attorney who was using ChatGPT for legal research, which is dangerous because of the hallucination problem. And in this case, it was a big problem. The attorney was searching for legal authority, and one of the biggest problems with legal authority is you never know when you're done with your legal research. Because let's say you find a case, you're not going to find a case that lines up perfectly with your case, usually. You need to find one that's close so that you can reason by analogy. And so this attorney thought, there has to be a case that stands for the proposition that I'm trying to argue for. And as he was searching and doing legal research, he couldn't find any. And so finally he asked ChatGPT, please find me a case that stands for this proposition. Give me a reference to a case that stands for this proposition, something to that effect. Now, the AI, in trying to be helpful, gave him exactly what he asked for, gave him a case that stood for that proposition with a perfectly, well-formatted citation. The only trouble was this case didn't exist. The question was was narrow, too narrow. A better question in that case would have been, are there any cases that stand for this proposition from this jurisdiction? Rather than saying, find me one that says this. In that case, there's an assumption baked into that question that one exists. And ChatGPT didn't, apply any sort of critical thinking to this and just said, okay, assuming that there is one, and it imagined one. Now, the attorney submitted this case in a filing with the court, and it went before the court, and the opposing counsel, the other attorneys in the case, looked at it and tried to look it up and couldn't find it, and it didn't exist. And they said, you know what, we think that this case doesn't exist. Brought it before the judge, and the judge ordered the first attorney, the one who had submitted this phony case, and said, hey, can you confirm that this thing is real? Because opposing counsel is not able to find it. And the attorney went to ChatGPT and said, can you confirm that this is real? And I don't remember exactly how he phrased the question, but ChatGPT returned back, oh yeah, of course it's real. And he relied on that information without critically analyzing it or confirming it in other ways, and submitted a phony case. He ended up getting, disciplined for this breach of ethics. The point with this is, be careful what you're asking for, because you just might get it. If you ask, give me a case that does this, it'll give you a case that does that. If you want to be sure that you're finding only cases that are real, you ask the question differently. Are there any cases that do this? Okay, after you get that open question, the first phase is the direct examination. The second phase is cross, where you say, okay, can you confirm that that's real? Can you show me a citation? Where is that found? You ask for the details that follow up and check. And in that case, you're trying to refute. You're trying to second guess. You're trying to, finger in the wind, check and see if this thing is real. I have found this to be incredibly helpful, to think in terms of get the Wikipedia answer first, get the general lay of the land, and then dial in, find something much more narrow. And when I have an idea that I want to run past ChatGPT as a sounding board for my own brainstorming, I'll say, this sounds, I think I understand this concept. Does that sound about right? And it will usually say yes. ChatGPT and the other LLMs tend to be very encouraging. They'll say mostly right. And I'll say, okay, please identify every place where I'm wrong, or every place where my analogy and understanding breaks down. And I ask a question that's designed to get ChatGPT to find all of the holes in what I've described. Or I will ask a cross-examination question, say, okay, if my understanding is correct, then, and then I'll ask a detail question. I'll ask, in this application, would this be such? And that's it's a weird cross-examination situation, because I'm technically cross-examining my own understanding, trying to use ChatGPT almost like a witness to double-check me. So that's my thoughts there. It looks like the stream is still having major issues, so we're going to go ahead and close there, unless I see any awesome comments from y'all, in which case we'll go ahead and continue. But I'm not seeing that at the moment. I'll give it a moment or two. Trying to get it to load. Nope, looks like that's probably all that's going to work. Thank you, and have a great